Welcome to Q&A, a program that raises questions and provides answers to issues important to the community. Today's topic is breathalyzers, at school and on the road. Our host is Kendra Cooper, a Massachusetts attorney and educator. Please join us now for episode 4 of Q&A. Welcome to Q&A. I'm today's host, it's Kendra Cooper, an attorney in Massachusetts. And our topic for today is breathalyzers. Breathalyzers have long been used as a means to evaluate whether someone is intoxicated or not, and as far as on the road goes. But recently it's been expanding into schools, and it's an area of concern for many attorneys, and it should be an area of concern for many parents and other residents. So we'd like to expose or explain to people exactly how breathalyzers work. My guests today are two attorneys in Massachusetts, Mark Stevens, my left, and James Milligan. They're both attorneys who have had a great deal of experience in criminal law and have had hundreds of cases involving intoxication and breathalyzers and the use thereof. James has been a prosecutor, and he concentrates his practice now in the area of those accused and driving under the influence. He's also very well versed in the difficulties and flaws in breathalyzers and how they're used. Attorney Mark Stevens practices in both New Hampshire and in Massachusetts, and he's also certified and trained in various devices that law enforcement uses to determine a person's level of intoxication. Let me say at the outset that none of us want to be on the roads with someone who is under the influence of alcohol. We believe that it's very important to have safe roads, but we also have concerns with some of the practices and some of the devices that are out there. Some people, believe that if you're accused of an offense, you must be guilty, and that's really not necessarily so. And we believe too, especially with the schools, that people try to do the right thing, but they don't really understand what they're doing when it comes to breathalyzers sometimes. So we're here today to help people understand a little better how breathalyzers work, what the situation is, and and how we can possibly help with people's understanding. First today, let's try the basics. Mark, can you explain to me a little bit of the basics? People hear these terms, OUIs, DWI, DUIs. What does that mean? Are they all the same? I mean, either one of you can explain that if you want.
Yeah, they're basically the same thing, Kendra. Driving under the influence, driving while intoxicated, operating under the influence. They're different names for basically the same thing.
Okay.
The penalties are the same, and it's just a matter of form what they're called. In Massachusetts, they're usually called OUIs, and in New Hampshire, they're usually called DWIs. The elements of the offense are the same.
Oh, they're all the same. Yeah. Now, when you say elements of the offense, what do you mean?
The elements would be that a person is operating a motor vehicle, that they're on a public way, and that they're under the influence of alcohol.
Okay. Now, what is your typical experience when you have, when someone's stopped? What do you believe is the usual experience? Say if somebody's driving down 93 and they get pulled over, what can they expect?
Well, it depends. Nowadays, if an officer smells alcohol, they're probably going to be treated to a series of field sobriety tests. They're going to be asked to get out of their car and to follow a pen or walk on a line, lift their leg in the air for a long period of time. And then sometimes they're asked to blow into these. These are the preliminary breath testers that we were talking about. And at the conclusion of all that, they're usually arrested. Once a person's invited out of the car, they're usually not invited to get back in. So
okay, it's pretty much an assurance then. If you step out, you're not going back in.
That's right. Unless you're an Olympic gymnast or something that can pass these things, then it's highly unlikely that they're going to be put back in the car once they're asked to get out.
Right. Now, when they're tested, or actually when they're asked, I mean, you said that if the officer smells alcohol in their breath, is it the alcohol that's, I mean, I don't really understand as far as, what does alcohol have a smell?
Well, the alcoholic beverages have a smell. That's an old lawyer technique would be alcohol has no smell when you're asking a cop a question, but the alcoholic beverages have a smell. I think that's pretty
It's a pretty
It's a pretty accepted thing. You can smell beer, you can smell wine, you can smell different things on people's breath. It's particularly prevalent if there's more than one person in the car who's been drinking, you know. So the officer smells that, and he's going to have some suspicions. He's going to question the person: how many have you had? When did you have your last one? The person's either going to say, I didn't have any, or they're going to say they had 2 earlier, for the most part.
If the now, what happens? What about the other people? You know, you have a car of kids, say, in the car, or people, and the other. Do they ask the other people to climb out too? And I mean, what?
Well, in New Hampshire, for sure they will, because if you're under 21 and you're under the influence of alcohol, then that's a separate offense. So those people would lose their license for 90 days if they're convicted. And that's where the officers are generally going to ask them to blow into one of these things.
And everybody in the car would. So this is something of concern, not just to the person who's driving then, but to the other occupants in the
If they're
car.
under 21, yes.
Right, yeah. Right. And that's Massachusetts or New Hampshire.
Well, in New Hampshire they do it. In New Hampshire it's a separate offense for blowing .02 or more into one of these little gadgets. So.
.02 or
right.
more. And that's, if that's by age? Or
right, if you're under 21.
Under
so.
21. If you're over 21, what would they have to blow?
Well, there'd be no penalty for the passenger in that case, you know, because the person can drink and not drive still in this country. At this point in time, it's probably going to change, but
you never know
we're going.
what's going to be happening. Do you have anything that you'd like to add about what your experience is when people are stopped? I mean, it's.
Yeah, I think Mark's right. I think in this day and age, I think if an officer smells alcohol, clearly you're coming out of the vehicle. Whether they see other indicia, whether it's your eyes, the way you're talking, your mannerisms, the way you produce certain documents like your license and registration, I think you can do all those things perfectly. And I think if they still smell alcohol, that you're going to come out of the vehicle. And given some of these tests, they're just difficult to do, particularly in that circumstance, that environment. So I think Mark's right in that most of the time when you come out of the vehicle and are asked to perform these tests, that most people are not going to do well enough for them to be released. And while they may say, well, I thought I did pretty well, I mean, these police officers are judged by clues. So it's not really subjective. They look at it from the way that the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration wants you to look at them. And if you have a certain amount of clues, you get placed under arrest, and that's just the way it works. The preliminary breath tests, we do see those frequently here in Massachusetts. Not all the officers or departments have them or have access to them, but generally, once they have those tests, there's one place you're going, and that's the back seat of that cruiser. So I would say that my experience is very similar to Mark's in that regard.
Yeah, and these are, now, you said preliminary breath tests. Now, is there another one? Or, you know,
Wow, that's a
when
great
they're
thing.
first stopped, they're on the side of the road, and
Right.
cars are whizzing by them, you know.
Right. These were made as sort of preliminary screening devices. Now they have kind of a talismanic effect of proving guilt or innocence. But they're really just a preliminary screening device, and then the person, usually the arrestee, is asked to take another breath test at the station, which is a more accurate type of gadget that they use. But these things, whenever a defense lawyer, we hear the word preliminary, little air quotes come up in our mind, and we think, not good enough. Not quite as good as a regular breath test, and it's not.
And that one that you've brought with you, that's just for preliminary. They
Right.
wouldn't use something like this. I don't know. If like this, if this is the size of your hand.
Right.
They would not use something like that in the police in the actual station.
No, not in the station. They have certified breath machines that are there, that are calibrated, and that have an external reference solution and so forth to in theory be more accurate than these. But basically, all these are, you push a button. It'll tell you to blow, tell the driver to blow. The driver will blow into the straw, and a number will come up. And it's as simple as that.
Oh, okay. So, but that's something they have certification for. The police would be certified in how to operate these breathalyzers.
Right, but the operation of it is pressing this button. You know, they do get a certificate that says they're certified to operate the thing, but you can operate it simply by pressing this button.
And that's it. Huh. When people are pulled over, I mean, a lot of times they're really confused. Whether you're under the influence of alcohol or not, it can be a very disturbing experience. What are the things? I know that sometimes they'll say, well, you touched upon it, when they open up their, they have to get their license and registration, and they have multiple activities they have to do, and there's a purpose for that. I guess. I mean, it's.
Yeah, I mean, anytime, the way that they're trained is that, everything they do, everything an operator does, they're trained to observe. So for instance, someone in production of their license and registration, they're looking for manual dexterity, because someone who's under the influence of alcohol, the manual dexterity, the fine motor skills is one of the first things to leave someone if they're impaired. So they're looking for how you produce that, whether or not you fumble, drop the item, produce the correct item, the registration. I don't know whose glove box they're looking at, but like mine, you have a bunch of papers that you need to sift through and hand it to them. But your sifting through those documents will be called fumbling, or some term designed to elicit, I guess, in your mind's eye, someone who's impaired. But these are all words that they're trained to look for, and I suppose it is fumbling. We would call it perhaps sifting. But once they observe those clues, like I said, you're going to come out of the vehicle and ask to perform a series of field sobriety tests. There are a lot of standardized tests, but there are some non-standardized tests that people are just naturally not going to perform well on, just because they're unusual tasks. For instance, walking heel to toe in a straight line. Nobody does that on an everyday basis. So stand on one leg for 30 seconds. Well, there's a lot of people that just can't do that.
Well, where do these standards come from? I mean, is this the national highway safety, or where do they come from? I mean,
I guess
I hear about field sobriety, but I don't know where
they come from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, and they've been around for a long time. They come from validation tests, but if you ever actually go back and look at these validation studies, there's a number of issues with them, and far too many to get into
right,
here.
yeah. Oh, I'm just thinking,
so they come up with studies over the years that say that if such and such a test, for instance, the one-legged stand, 65% of the if you give it correctly and look for the certain clues, you can correctly classify 65% of the people you give this test to. That's 65%. So as a test in and of itself.
When you say classify, you mean they'll
someone
be
who's impaired.
Impaired, yeah, okay.
So as a test, it gets a D.
Right.
The 9-step walk and turn. And that is go 9 steps heel to toe, turn around and come back. And I've truncated the instructions. The instructions are actually about 30 seconds to a minute. That's a 68% correctly classified.
And so this comes from the federal government? Is that?
Yeah, so it's got to be good.
Well, yeah, I know. Yes, it's got to be good.
But this is what they have. This is their training. So I'm not going to say they shouldn't follow their training. This is what they're told to do, and they
exactly,
do it.
But see, people need to understand how this comes to be, because you'll read the newspaper and you'll see they failed the field sobriety test or they failed the breathalyzer, but people really don't understand. I mean, I don't understand exactly what that involves.
Sure, and part of the reason for it in this part of the country, too, is they don't tend to videotape. You see these videotapes of arrests out west or in the Midwest.
Yeah, Texas.
All the field sobriety tests, you watch Cops or one of these shows on TV, and the whole thing's videotaped. The field sobriety tests are right there. They are what they are. You can't add to it. You can't subtract from it. The police departments, by and large in New Hampshire, and I don't know about down here, but they don't videotape the roadside field sobriety tests. So it's up to the officer's memory or imagination or whatever you'd like to call it, and what he writes down in his report, and that's going to be the evidence. And a lot of these things, if you read their manual, it's geared towards prosecution right from the time they ask for the license or registration on to the time of the putting of the handcuffs on. So if you read their manual on the production of license or registration, it's ask them for both things at once because it's more likely to confuse them. It's as simple as that. They're trying to confuse you when they ask for these things.
Right.
They say license or registration at the same time for a reason, because the person's under pressure, there's blue lights going on behind them. This wasn't what they had in mind when their night started out, and now they're under pressure and being asked for two things at once. So a lot of times the person might only hand the license over. The police officer is going to describe that as not being able to follow instructions. So another scary thing that's happening too, I know in both states, is that you don't have to be doing anything wrong anymore to get stopped. There's roadblocks popping up everywhere because the federal government wants to impose those in all the states. They're paid for by the feds, and your odds of being stopped for doing nothing wrong at all are just increasing year by year. In New Hampshire, we went from 7 roadblocks 3 years ago to 44 this year, and it's all federally paid for. So apparently, there's federal money out there somewhere.
Yeah, I guess so. Have you run into roadblocks being more increased in Massachusetts?
Yeah, I mean, the state police, particularly during the summer months for obvious reasons, but the state police, in conjunction with local police departments, will target certain areas that they deem to be high volume OUI areas or high traffic incident areas that they think qualify, that a lot of people who are drinking.
Cape traffic, or
a lot of people who are drinking and driving.
93, yeah, right.
So they look for choke points. They look for where people would naturally travel, whether it's a high, whether it's Quincy and Quincy Shore Boulevard or up here on the Linway. They put them in places where people naturally are going to go through. And like Mark said, I mean, they stop every single vehicle.
Right.
And
Places they can't get away.
And
They can't, yeah.
In other words, a place with no exit
No
strategy.
exits or entrances, yeah.
No way to avoid the unwanted intrusion. So
once you're in, it's like a funnel. You can't go anywhere but through it. And you may have had a glass of wine or with your wife or girlfriend or whatever, and you're just coming home, and there's a good chance that they're going to smell an odor of alcohol from you and send you to what's referred to as a pit area or a screening area. And there you get about 10, 15 troopers with cruisers, blue lights, and it can be a difficult environment.
Okay. A new area is the breathalyzers in schools. I'm seeing a lot more of that. I'm hearing about it. Foxborough was in the news recently, and down near Gillette Stadium, and they said they really don't have more of a problem than any other town, even though it is, right near Gillette Stadium. But I mean, they've implemented a new policy, and then in Reading, Massachusetts, they've just recently voted in a policy on breathalyzers. There are many towns, I know if you go on the Foxborough website, they list several different communities that had done this before when people had said, well, we're the first in the state, and it's not really true. It has been some places. But there are real concerns with that, especially if they hinge suspension of from school or, for some of these activities. Have you encountered that? Or, I know that your specialty is more with motor vehicles, but what are your concerns when you start thinking about that?
Well, I mean, my concerns are the devices that perhaps they're using. For instance, the device that Mark has here. That device isn't admissible in any court. While they use them on a frequent basis, it's not considered reliable enough to be admissible against somebody in court. So it's my understanding that these are the devices they're using. And there are issues, I would say, I think, with them, in that, again, it employs fuel cell technology, which in and of itself has some problems with it, particularly in relation to detecting alcohol. I don't know what, they're all different types of devices, but who's calibrating it?
Yeah, let me show you how this works.
Because I've listened to some of the meetings that they've had about different school committees in Massachusetts, and it's interesting that they'll have people like a high school principal or assistant principal administer these, in particular, for a dance, but they consider them to be passive. And one description that I listened to was that you just talk into it as if you were talking into a microphone, as fast as you can say your name, and it indicates alcohol or no alcohol. And
sounds like more fun than karaoke.
I'm just trying to understand. I mean, so what is the problem with that?
Well, I have two problems with it. The threshold problem, the biggest problem, is that they're searching people without any probable cause. So every student who goes to this dance without slurring their speech, any balance problems, no odor, no nothing, everybody line up and get searched just because it's convenient for somebody to do so, and I don't think that's right. But beyond that, if you're using one of these things to determine guilt or innocence, you might as well put your faith in a slot machine or something, or roll dice to determine whether they've got alcohol in their system. If there's alcohol in their system, will this detect it? Probably, but it will have a lot of false positives too, and that's where the concern lies, because you can trip one of these into a positive result with gum, mouthwash, breath strips, things that are very, very common and quite likely that high school students are going to have in their mouths at a dance. So are you going to suspend a kid because he's chewed his favorite gum? Or kick him off a sports team because she's rinsed her mouth out before a dance? It's crazy. And I don't think, if you are an experienced educator or a police officer or even a person, you need to have somebody blow into one of these things to determine if they're drunk or not. You can't tell by smelling someone, talking to them, watching their balance and their coordination that they've had something to drink. I doubt it.
Yeah, I think that educators are looking for something that's simple, that will somehow look like it's addressing, improved safety of students. And some school systems have more of a problem than others. Some of them, I think, frankly, are just jumping on the bandwagon.
Sure.
Because they want to appear like they're being, they're forward-looking, but I mean, when I look at some of the ways that they're describing and some discussions that school committees will have on this, they say it's fast and easy, breathalyzer test. It almost sounds like an advertisement, that's
Sure.
Fast and easy. It can confirm alcohol use and prove sobriety. And that's particularly of concern to me, that this is going to confirm alcohol use and help the student prove or prove sobriety. I mean, how do you feel about that?
When did we start having to
Right.
prove sobriety? When do we have to prove that we're innocent?
I don't think that the use of that device proves any of those things. You have teachers for a reason. You trust them. I mean, like Mark said, you can look at somebody and say, this child looks fine. They're not showing any overt manifestations of consumption of alcohol. I don't smell it on them, nothing. But here, blowing this, and if you blow a .01 or .02, even though you're showing no signs of anything, well, we're going to suspend you from school or take you off the hockey team. Or I just don't think it's a fair application of that device. There's no checking mechanism. There's no secondary test. None of the things that we would require to come into a court are done here. There's no procedural safeguards. It's basically you blow into this once, and here you go. Who's maintaining it? Who's giving it? Even though it's easy to give, but these machines aren't foolproof. They need to be maintained from time to time. And who's going to be doing that, and under what circumstance?
Think about this way, Kendra, if I could. This is what these are powered by. They're powered by a couple of AAA batteries, just like the remote control, at your house. Have you ever had to get up and stand a little closer to the TV, or to
I'll hold it
or to adjust the position of a remote control? These are no more reliable than that. So what if you're the kid who gets the remote control job that didn't work quite right, and you blow an O2 and you haven't had any alcohol at all, and now you've got to explain yourself and prove your innocence because of what this crazy thing says? It makes no sense.
And the other thing that we were talking about, Kendra, Mark, we were talking about this before, these things are only good for so many tests, and then they need to be calibrated. So we were talking about what happens if you get somebody at a dance where there's 200 kids that come through. Are they going to calibrate it right then and there, or do something with that? My guess is no.
And even if they have two going, because I know in one of the communities, 3 years ago, they received one of these, but they got two of them from some sort of safety grant. But number one, it's 3 years old. And
I feel safer knowing they've got them. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I wonder about some of the things that were received from grants 3 years ago. But there's the belief. I think there's this contrast between what some of the educators have been led to believe about these, and parents, and PTOs.
Sure.
And what I'm sensing is the reality. And I mean, like one of the statements that a principal made was that in 99.9% of the times that they use this, there's no alcohol. So if a student is found to be using, there then is this disposable mouthpiece or whatever that thing is.
Sure.
You can handle it. You can show how it works, because a demonstration that was done at a school committee meeting was that you just hold it up and you talk into it. And I'm thinking, my understanding had been that for a breath test to be really accurate, they're trying to analyze the breath down in your lungs, the deep lung air, where you have the transfer of the blood and the lungs. But I don't understand if you're just holding it and talking into it. How is that accurate? I don't know.
Some of them are passive alcohol screeners, and they would have like a funnel type device on the front of it, and if the person is talking, it would read alcohol. But here's the problem. Let's say you and I are standing next to this thing. We're prom dates or whatever, we walk into the thing and I'm talking into it and you've got alcohol in your breath and I don't.
Right.
I talk into it and it reads positive.
Okay.
Okay? Then
so you can be that far away. I mean...
oh, sure. Think about it. It's just catching room air into a funnel. Okay? What if the person before you was blowing alcohol all over the place and you step up to the plate and there's still alcohol blowing in? The problem with these things, there's a number of them, but one of them is, like Jay was saying, most manufacturers of these gizmos recommend that they be retested, recalibrated every so many tests. Like for this one, it's every 30 tests. What are you going to do at a high school dance where you have a couple hundred kids?
Right.
You're going to say, oh, hang on a sec, guys. Everyone hold up the line. We're going to calibrate this thing. It's going to take about a half hour, but everyone have a good old time. It doesn't make sense.
And they do mention that they will, if there's a reading, then they'll test them. And there's also been the discussion about testing kids during the dance. In case someone smuggles something in, but some policies also are so broad that they don't just. It's not just dances. It's in some policies they've written it as if any school-sponsored activity, whether at the school or anywhere, and that's kind of frightening to me too. I mean, I'm not sure as an educator what we're teaching our kids.
Right.
That we should be their models, and you hope that your children are not drinking, and you certainly hope they're not driving. And at the same time, you want somehow to be their models. And in a way, I'm looking at basic rights that I feel the school systems are ignoring with policies like this, especially the presumption that you have to prove that you're sober.
Right.
And when you do that, when you're bringing people, you're testing everybody who walks in the door, the assumption is that any one of them could be, it could be.
Right, and how big is the problem if 99.9% of the people that blow into these things don't have any alcohol in their system? How big a problem is that to trade off the privacy rights that you trade off when you make everyone blow into these things? Anytime you're giving up a right, you've got to look at what do you get in return. And if what you're getting in return is 0.01% positive readings, all of which might be false positives, what are you getting out of this?
Right. That's the reason that they're implementing these policies are that they say that this way they can keep children safe.
Yeah, that's sort of like saying, you know, if we searched every person, we searched every pocket out there in the streets of Reading, we'd find some drugs. So let's go ahead and search everybody, because if you're innocent, you have nothing to fear. But that changes the way of life that we have. And students don't give up their privacy rights just because they go to a public school. And what are you getting out of this? You know, do more people drink at dances? I don't know. I don't remember. But do they drink more at dances than they do somewhere else? I don't know. Schools have a well-settled, you know, public safety concern. They got a concern to keep their kids safe. But if a kid shows up drunk to a dance, you know, obviously you don't want him driving. But beyond that, why does this make him safer if he blows an 04 into this thing? It doesn't make him any safer. It doesn't make the other kids safer.
I think there have been a few instances where someone would just pass out at a dance.
I don't think I need him to
Unfortunately-
blow into this to tell he's
Well,
drunk.
yeah, right. Another kind of disturbing point was made by another school system in which they said, well, you know, at least this will tell us whether they are drunk or if they're not, because they're acting kind of crazy. You know, maybe they're under the influence of something else. And unfortunately, this doesn't help you at all.
No, it doesn't. I mean, if you had a young man or lady who was really determined to get a groove on and they know they're going to be tested with this, they smoke a joint instead of drinking. You know, this doesn't deter people from becoming under the influence that are really determined to be so. The catch with this is that, one of the catches with this is that these things don't work that well. Second, it doesn't look like there's a huge problem with kids being drunk at the dances. The one who passes out, you don't need this to tell that he's drunk. And if it's 0.01% of the kids, it seems a shame that everybody has to be subjected to this because of that very, very small minority of people that are supposedly drunk. As far as doing them at other school events, I don't know how many kids show up drunk to play hockey. I doubt they're going to make the tournament if they're in that kind of condition. But why do they have to blow, you know, in that situation or at a basketball game? It's crazy. The thing is, if you think of it just logically, if a kid shows up drunk to the high school dance, you don't let him in, and you suspend them or do whatever you're going to do. You don't compromise everybody's privacy rights because of that one person.
Yeah.
And even in a roadblock, with that analogy, in a roadblock, you can still refuse to blow into the thing. There might be a consequence for you refusing to take a breath test, but you can still refuse to do it. Here they're saying you either blow into it or you're going to get suspended. If you blow over, you're going to get suspended. So they're
Well,
taking away their right to
If you refuse,
Right.
right. And or if you blow.
What if the kid
you're in
knows these
trouble.
things don't work? You know, it's got nothing to do with guilt or innocence. It's just I don't trust this thing. I wouldn't blow into it any more than I would spend my money at Foxwoods. This is just taking a chance that you're going to pass or not. It's got nothing to do with intoxication. I think part of it too is that if you're just shown, you know, if we were to dose you up with some alcohol and get you to blow in this and it blew a number and you failed this test, and that was the only experience you had with one of these things, you'd say, oh boy, that's a great tool. It's a nice little cheap screening device. The federal government pays for it, and it doesn't cost us anything, and it will tell when people are drunk. The problem is that it tells some people or reads some people who are not drunk as drunk. They've never seen somebody rinse their mouth out with a leading mouthwash and blow an 08 into one of these things. Very easy to do. You can replicate that result anytime.
Yes. Huh. Well, I'd love to talk longer on this, but I think our time is flying. Perhaps at another opportunity we'll be able to discuss Melanie's Law. But I appreciate your coming today. This has been
Thanks for having us.
wonderful. Yeah.
Kendra.
Thanks.
Thanks
Thank
a
you,
lot.
Mark. Thank you, Jay. And you know, I appreciate your watching. This is Kendra Cooper, and you know, we'll hope to have future programs on Q&A of public interest. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.